Welcome. I'm Tom Doorley of Sage Partners. We're continuing our series on navigating the fog of change. Today, we're going to be dealing with the issues of the challenges that a young company faces in leading its organization, leading its company through the fog of change. Our perspective today is from a young company point of view, and my guest is Don Plumley. Don is a Sage partner. He's our COO and a leader of our venture growth practice. Welcome, Don.
Great to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know Don, let me tell you what I know about him. He and I have worked together to help us run our little company here, Sage Partners. We've worked on clients together, some experience with understand who Don is. He's a seasoned operator, somebody who's helped his clients and companies scale from young companies to established companies. He's worked as a CEO himself, and so he describes himself as a really important idea here as a recovering CEO. He's a strategic marketer who does a great job of understanding what the key issues are and then crafting stories for our clients that help them make their case in the world. He's able to bring this experience that he's learned in the field into the conditions we have with our clients. He describes himself, and I agree with this, as at one time he was the pilot, he was at the controls, and now he's in the control tower telling him, hey, here's what to look out for, here's what to do. So Don, I'm thankful that we can have this conversation together.
I'm delighted to be here. That was a very generous introduction, Tom. Thank you very much.
So today we're talking about life from a young company perspective. And we have this challenge that we're all facing. We call it the fog of change. And it has to do with massive change, fast change, and change that's going to go on forever. So Don, talk about how the fog of change hits the challenges that a young company, a leader faces.
Well, I think startups feel disruption more intensely than established companies. You know, in a startup, the fog of change doesn't just blur the path, it like erases it. Because you're not just navigating with instruments, you're drawing the map while you're flying and building the plane. You don't have this institutional muscle memory to fall back on. You know, founders, they're creating while they're executing. They don't have a lot of margin for error as well. You know, they don't tend to have the kind of capital reserves of larger companies or access to credit markets. You know, the simple things, systems and roles and team dynamics, they're often still forming. And to a startup founder, you know, this change, it feels personal and existential. It's not a procedural problem that we're going to solve and get to the next quarterly earnings call. This change affects startups even more intensely, and it's existential in many cases, as I mentioned. But I think the positive part, and this is why I love working with startups, is they can adapt and change at a speed that larger companies can't contemplate. And so great leadership really shines through in the fog of change because they're going to be able to lead their companies more quickly through the disruption and find a clear runway ahead.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So the advantage that a large company has is the advantage of scale. They can take a hit, perhaps more than one hit. Young companies, they can't take many hits, if any hits at all. So part of the issue that then you described that nicely is the communications lines are simpler, smaller number of people to talk to. But here comes the challenge. You go from 2 to 10 to 50 to 100. Now what? How do you help them deal with the fact of scaling? You talked about you're helping companies scale. So now how do you scale the messaging as your company grows?
Well, I think founders often at this pivot point where creativity has to start giving way to leadership disciplines. And there's a moment when founders have to stop building the product and start building the company. And that there's a shift from maker to multiplier. And that's the hardest and most essential part of a job of a startup founder. So all of the instincts that drive the innovation of founders, which is speed and control, proximity, they can become liabilities during scale. So leadership requires working through others, building trust, letting go of some control. And I know that Cordell talked about that in your previous episode in terms of that, you know, that feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm letting go. And for a startup founder, it's even harder. And that's why communication becomes this core skill. Aligning teams, clarifying strategy, and reinforcing culture. This founder's got to make a shift, Tom, from doer in chief to sense maker in chief.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important. So we talk about with our clients creating a leaders change agenda, a small number of things, 5 maybe, but small number. So how does that work for a young company, and particularly how do they make the story? How do you make the story so it's a sensible story that allows you to pivot, but keeps everybody focused on what's important?
Well, early stage companies benefit from structure amid chaos. The leaders change agenda for a startup. It doesn't have to be a manifesto. It can be one page, but it's got to be real. It says, this is what matters right now. Here's how we're going to show up for one another while we figure out the rest. Now, in a founder, the narrative about their business is almost always locked in their head. It needs out. The founder has been thinking about this business, this idea. That's all they do 24 hours a day. It's in their head. And as a result, they think everyone must know. I know, it's all I think about. It's the leader's responsibility to communicate this change agenda. It should be simple. It should start with that vision, remind people, why are we here? Reinforce culture, and then a couple of clear priorities. You set tone by creating alignment, even if that end state is still evolving, because especially for startups, the key isn't rigid planning, but it's focused engagement and it's small, visible wins. I guess I share an anecdote. I've been involved in strategic change on companies of a lot of different scale. And I'm reminded of one particular circumstance where it's a small company. It's 100 people, or more than half of them are working on a factory floor. We had to make some significant change. Change is hard. Most people, even though they say they like change, don't necessarily respond well to it.
Right.
So my job on these monthly all-hand meetings was to try to explain where we were on the change agenda to the team. And if you could draw a graph of the change agenda from where we are to where we want to go, it starts on the lower left-hand side of a graph and it goes to the upper right-hand side. But change isn't a linear path. It's a sine wave across there. And there are moments of extreme positive change, and you might hit breakthrough performance. And there are moments where change has taken a dip below the median line and everyone's discouraged. And this is where that leader and their agenda is so important, to be able to say to your team, folks, I know we're having a tough go at it today, but look at how far we've come. We were here. We said we want to get to there, and we're still on that path. We're further along than we were before. And I think this kind of is positive communication. It's factual. You're not trying to create a story. When you're discussing the change agenda and strategic change with the leadership team, particularly when you have, let's say, hourly workers in your workforce, you'll hear, well, I don't know if we can be this candid and share all these details with everyone. And my response was, well, they're all adults. They're voting age to work here. And they have children in kindergarten. They've got kids in high school that have problems. They've got to pay their rent or their mortgage. They're all adults. They have a tougher world outside of our walls. So being candid and honest with change and be able to communicate it both factually, clearly, but with optimism and hope, I think that's the secret of a great communicator and a great leader.
Yeah, really important. And I think your idea that says that sometimes we forget, even though the sine wave goes up and down, the down is much higher than the place we started. And It's important to remember that. So not too long ago, I was at a wedding, and I met a fellow who works with a company called Abode in the Bay Area. And what Abode does is they build housing for homeless people. They have a backlog of $1 billion and having problems getting it through the regulation systems in order to build the housing. It's very, very discouraging. But he said to us a really important thing, which echoes what you said. Every day we get together, the CEO says, there are 1,700 people who are not sleeping on the street today because of us. So let's get frustrated. Let's give ourselves credit. So I think that's important. You got to understand sort of where you're in the sine wave. So here's this idea then that says that you have to be flexible. You don't have a fixed plan. You have priorities, but you got to figure it out. So how do you tell your organization that here are the 5 things we want to focus on? Oh, by the way, there may be a new thing coming down the road. How are you going to prepare for that?
Well, I think this is I've heard this on different podcasts, and it's talking about the military and how they evaluate decision making.
Yep.
And decisions are evaluated based on the information you have at the time you make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about whether you won the skirmish or the war. It's what decisions did you make given the information you had at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's an important part of this open communication. This is what we know today. As a result of what we know today, these are the decisions we've made, and here's where we expect it'll do for us. And you've mentioned this before, we're in a period of incredible disruption, social, economic, political, geopolitical. Change is coming at us fast and rapid. So the decisions you make today, based on the information you have today, next week or next month, the situation may be quite different. And that's when you can say with confidence to your team, okay, the battlefield has changed. We now have new things to worry about. So we made good decisions. Now we're making new ones, and we're going to do new things to accommodate the change in our environment. And this is important because it takes you out of this feeling reactive to everything. But you remind people, we made good decisions, we executed on those decisions, and now we're going to move forward and look at, there's new opportunity over here. And this is where a startup is fantastic, because a leader can say, look, there's opportunity here. If we move together as a team, we can capture this opportunity.
And I think part of your message there is that the leader needs to be authentic. Back during the COVID times, you and I did a series of webinars called Reigniting Growth. And one of the people who was on our webinar was the CEO of King Arthur Baking. And she talked about how in COVID, she would get everybody together, 400 people, not a huge organization, and they would talk about issues. And somebody would raise a question she didn't have an answer to. She wouldn't try to answer it. She said, I don't know the answer to that. The next time we're together, I'll do a better job for you. Authenticity is really important. So let's talk about seeing through the fog. And so this idea of the leaders and the others being able to say, we need to change a little bit because there's opportunity over here. So one of our SAGE partners, Larry Bennington, was a naval officer on a ship, big ship, out to sea. And he would say that when the fog bank rolled in, you would call for reinforcements to lookouts. So you needed more lookouts, and the lookouts were there to look out for danger. So all organizations need lookouts. We think they also need someone else, and I call those people the scout. Somebody needs to look out for opportunity. If the lookout is supposed to be the danger, the scout is supposed to find opportunity. In a young company, can you build that into one person, or again, is this something you can also distribute, share with the other folks in the organization?
That's a great question. Well, we have limited numbers of people in a startup or a young company, and people are used to wearing multiple hats. So I think in that context, asking people to let's look out for things on the horizon that we didn't expect, but let's also look for opportunities that we weren't aware of. Mm-hmm. And so having people have their radar open to not be in threat detection mode only, but opportunity mode, I think that again gets back to the point of good leadership in the fog of change. How do you draw your team together? How do you say, here's our situation, and what are we going to do on this together? We need you to be aware of our environment, particularly if the product touches their lives in any way, shape, or form. And then to be that kind of authentic leader who encourages this kind of conversation. And this is, we could probably talk about this for hours in terms of the character of leadership and how do you foster two-way communication where people feel comfortable saying, hey, I see this problem, I wanted you to know, versus I'm scared to bring this up because I might have job risk or whatever, or I look like I don't know what I'm doing, which is even more important as leadership. So these are things that the leader had to establish early on in their character and how they communicate with their team. But you really need to bring it to another level of open communication in this kind of a disruptive period.
Yeah, I think you've got it. And so that's always the challenge, the ability to, as a leader grows, to be able to sort of give up some things and to be able to be a leader, not just a shaper of the organization. So one of the things that you've talked about, or we've both talked about, is the importance to have clients who listen not just take our advice totally, but listen. Talk about the importance of clients who are able to take in advice, use advisors, because I believe, and this I do this, I'm obviously prejudiced here because I'm a long-term advisor, but I believe it's important to have people who are a little bit above the fray, who can give you advice to say, hey, have you thought about, and important. So the role of a client being a good listener.
Well, and this is both the, kind of the value advisors, and listen, we all have some skin in the game on this one. We are in the business of giving advice. It's actually the best part of what I get to do every day is chatting with founders and providing, the few lessons, anecdotes, or whatever to help them move their business forward. But we find that founders that are more successful are ones who take in advice well and use the parts of it that then they want to implement. And so experienced outside voices can be essential in periods of fast change. When you're in the fire, you need someone who's just not holding the hose with you. That way they can help you see the wind direction, especially if the fire's sneaking up behind you.
Mm-hmm.
A good advisor brings altitude, pattern recognition, and an honest perspective. A really good advisor will tell you where the problems are, even if the problem is you, if the problem is you're not communicating well. Yeah. Founders, they need someone to ask the questions they're avoiding. Yeah. And this is from personal experience. It's lonely. Running a small firm, the weight of the world is on your shoulders. You've got to be brave, not just to the team, but now to your board, to your investors, and even your family. You look like you have to have this all managed, and you don't. Mm-hmm. You have questions, you have worries, you have concern. So having that, advisors for you and the company, that personal board or mentor that can help keep a leader grounded and strategic, to be able to be vulnerable, in fact, to be able to say, I don't know how to do this, and even when you have a good sense of what you need to do, being able to say, I don't have all the answers, it's a hard thing for people to say. Listen, we're taught from a young age to not do that. And in this kind of environment, the authenticity comes from admitting you don't have all the answers, but by gosh, we're going to work on it together and we're going to figure it out. So I think, leaders that listen well, that take in advice well, and then act upon it really tends to signal someone who's likely to be successful over the long run versus someone who really just only wants to believe they know it all.
That's an important message. So kind of as we close here, let me ask you to talk about, I always do this with my guests to say, give me your elevator pitch. What are you going to be doing over the next several years? And the one thing that I've heard you say, and you kind of said it a bit today, is that working with young companies is fun. It is really fun. So talk about that. And I assume you're going to keep having fun for a while longer, right, Don?
Until it's not fun, and that's just hard to envision. I have fled large companies my corporate career, and because younger, smaller companies are more facile, you can come up with an idea and then you can see the result of that idea in hours, weeks, or months. And that's very much unlike the large corporation. So in terms of what I'm enjoying is, in moving in this transition from operator to advisor, trying to do these sort of things with empathy and clarity. So, we've been using a cockpit analogy. I love airplanes. Not being in the cockpit, but helping founders fly the plane from the control tower. I can provide a view of both the runway and that long horizon in front of them. As this recovering CEO, as I've often joked about, I bring scars and a playbook, a big toolkit. I try to help founders stay focused, how to communicate clearly and lead with intent, even in uncertain times. So my goal in mentoring and advising founders in particular is to help them grow into the role their company will need 6 to 18 months from now. So when they do have the big hits, they're already prepared because they need to stay ahead of their board, the market, the industry, and to be able to have that coach on the side pushing them along brings me incredible personal satisfaction and clearly the best part of what I get to do every day.
And I very much like your idea that you talk about the evolution of a young company leader from building a product or a service to building a company. Products come and go. Companies, if they're built right, have staying power.
Absolutely.
Right. So thank you, Don, for this conversation. I've enjoyed it. And for those of you who are looking forward to our next conversation, we're going to be touching on other things, including the perspective from a large company CEO. So until our next conversation, take care, be well.